And to carry this conversation, we've assembled quite the panel to talk about the results of last night's elections in Virginia. From Washington, we got BNC political contributor Amisha Cross. Also San Diego, here we go. We got Shane Harris, president of the People's Association of Justice Advocates. And last but not least, I think he likes to be last though, Paris Dennard in Washington, D.C. He's the national spokesperson and director of the Black Media Affairs for the Republican National Committee. Welcome you all to BNC Live. It's a pleasure to have you. First, let's take a look at the numbers from the gubernatorial election in Virginia. And while we do that, hopefully it'll show up. If it doesn't, in the meantime, we'll just keep the questions going. What message did voters send in Virginia? Amisha, we'll start with you.
It depends on the voters. I think for Republicans, the message was that culture wars work, pushing racialized language, racialized territory works. For Democrats, it was that coalition that Joe Biden built in 2020 is not solid in non-presidential election years. With that being said, you can't nationalize a race around Donald Trump, who is not currently on a ballot anywhere and not on social media either. So I think for Democrats, it's learning that this fight is not against the ghost of Donald Trump. It actually has to be against your opponent, but also an understanding that these culture wars, these race wars, this divide that has been driven by the Republican Party is really galvanizing their base.
All right, Paris, we'll go to you. Critical race theory was at the forefront of elections, not only in Virginia, but across the country. Is this the playbook Republicans are now running on? And do Democrats need to reevaluate their stance to reach more voters?
Well, it wasn't just critical race theory, although it's a problem and it was being taught in Virginia. It were other issues like having school choice and supporting HBCUs. The first black governor of Virginia, Governor Wilder, said that he only got about one phone call from Terry McAuliffe, and he got regular calls from Glenn Youngkin, and they talked extensively about HBCUs, and that's why Glenn Youngkin put out a speech saying that he was going to fully fund and support HBCUs in every single one of his budgets. So education was on the ballot. The economy was on the ballot, reducing taxes and getting rid of the food tax and groceries that was there, putting a moratorium on gas taxes that was there because of the rising cost of gasoline. So there were a lot of issues that pertained to the black community that resonated with the black community, resonated with all voters, that could be a roadmap for the victory that I think Republicans will have in 2022 and 2024. Listening to what Kamala Harris, our vice president, said, saying Virginia will help in large part determine what will happen in 2022 and 2024. That means Republican wins. That's a red wave, and I think that's going to happen.
All right. And yes, now Lieutenant Winsome Sears, she did mention HBCU funding in her victory speech. So Shane, we'll go to you. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really critical issue, especially for African Americans across the Commonwealth. And I think that there needs to be a real focal point on what Republicans are doing to change their message. Obviously, this was a black woman, and this speaks to a significant larger part of what we should be discussing, which is the reality that this campaign, the Youngkin campaign, did not focus on Trump. Actually, McCall's campaign focused more on Trump than Youngkin's campaign. And I think that this needs to be an indicating point that people want to know about the issues. They want to know where you're going to stand on education. They want to know where you're going to stand on equity. They want to know where you're going to stand on the issues, not on Trump, the former president. And I think that that was a unique mixture of leadership that brought this campaign to high visibility in the Commonwealth and ultimately led to a victory, which we're still counting votes. But ultimately, this is what we're looking at. So it was not, their campaign was not a referendum on or dealt with Donald Trump. But the McAuliffe campaign focused on making a referendum on Trump, making this election about that instead of the issues. And I think that needs to be the message to Democrats today. You cannot use Trump as the scapegoat anymore. We need to get on the issues. Where are you going to stand? What are the people going to get?
All right, Amisha, to piggyback off of Shane, he said Republicans need to change their language. It seems like their language is working for them. They won.
I would agree with that. And I'm no Republican strategist by any means, but I think that as long as Republicans are able to galvanize and bring their base out, that is a victory for them. I don't think that they have to change a single thing. Now, will the anti-CRT rhetoric work across the board when we get to the midterms? It depends on the state. But I agree with what I heard earlier from Paris, because at the end of the day, what Republicans did in Virginia, which was extremely smart, I would say, is that they localized the race in a way that made sense to and understood the voice of the people on the ground. This wasn't just CRT, which I have value disagreements about, how they use that within the race, but it is moreover about the tax base, about people who feel like they cannot afford gas, people who cannot afford rent or cannot afford food for their families. Meanwhile, Democrats were not necessarily elevating those issues as much as they were listening to and taking notes from the California race. And the California race is not an example that can be utilized across the board for Democrats. Utilizing former President Trump in almost every single ad, bringing in the big names. You had Obama, you had Biden, you had Stacey Abrams, and really echoing the Trump race of 2020 did not serve to bring out Democratic voters. And I think that's the biggest thing that they can learn from this. Republicans know how to talk to their base and bring them together. Democrats have a really hard time doing that outside of presidential election years, and technically have always had a hard time doing it in state and local races.
Yeah, Paris, this one's for you. Winsome Sears, we were just talking about her, the conservative Republican elected as Virginia's first female and first woman of color, along with Jason Miyares, son of Cuban exiles, elected as Attorney General. Race, as we mentioned, was one of the factors or one of the issues at the forefront, along with other things, including education and funding. But does this win change the narrative? And is the race card move, is that dying?
Well, look, the Democrats tried to say that, critical race theory and dog whistles and all this stuff was part of this election. When you look at Glenn Youngkin, he got about 13% of the black vote at a CNN exit poll. He did extremely well with Hispanic voters in Virginia. They turned out for him in a very significant way. And also you had the wins of Winsome Sears. But, Winsome has run an election before. And when she ran in the state house in Virginia, she actually won in a majority black district as a Republican. And we also had A.C. Cordoza from Virginia get elected, black Republican. You had Jalen Johnson in Georgia get elected. And you also had Donald Douglas in Kentucky get elected as a black Republican. So what this tells you is the narrative has to change, because the Republican Party is more diverse, it is growing, and it is reflective of the communities of color. And so you can see black women, black men, young black women across the country that look like us being elected to these offices and talking about issues that pertain to our community. And that's critically important. We have to have both sides of the aisle represented talking about our issues. And so we always win when we have Republicans talking about HBCUs. We win when we have Republicans talking about school choice. We win when we have Republicans talking about HBCU support. We win when we have Republicans talking about entrepreneurship. We win in that nature. And then we won last night. So we should take pride in knowing that we have representation on both sides of the aisle, especially in Virginia.
All right. Hearty conversation. So much more to eat. We actually got to take a break. So please save that, Shane. And once on the other side, we'll come right back to you. Thank you.